We all know that the fires of hell are under the earth. The sun passes down there every night and therefore comes up blazing hot in the morning. I rather had my breath taken away by this explanation, which met with ejaculations of approbation from the men around me, and I incautiously asked the mullah if he could explain the seasons. Mullah, turning to the people, "It is evident that I shall have to teach him everything from the beginning." And then to me, "It is in the spring that the devil makes up his fires and piles on the firewood. Therefore the fires get very hot in the summer and cool down later on. That is why the summer sun is very hot." Needless to say, the explanations of the mullah appeared to the audience as rational and lucid as mine were far-fetched and incomprehensible, and they had no doubt as to which of the disputants had won the day. From this it can be seen that if a young missionary thinks that a mere knowledge of Western learning and Western logic will enable him to cope with the very limited learning of the Afghan mullahs on their ground, he is vastly mistaken, and will before long be put to ridicule as I was on the above occasion, which was one of my earliest experiences on the frontier. Since then I have learnt how to argue with Afghan logic, and from an Afghan point of view.
I'm finding it hard to concentrate this afternoon. My attention is divided. All of a sudden, these tiny men regroup and look straight through the lens at me. I want to get them back into their box, but they're holding me against my will. When I eventually get out of the building, I feel completely drained. I've been staring out of the train window for 20 minutes before the ticket inspector informs me that I am headed in the wrong direction. I spend the next morning in bed, reading about 1951.
As flood relief efforts continue in Oxfordshire, Surrey, Somerset and along the Thames. They also announced that 600 troops have been deployed in flood-hit areas. The troops will be invaluable, having spent the last 10 years preparing.
In the evening, I dig out a box of my father's slides. It has my name written on it. I inspect the slides for clues, but decide to discount them because they don't show anything significant.
Can I ask you to give a warm welcome to Miranda Pennell for these films? Thank you. So I thought we could kind of, I think it's always useful to begin at the beginning. And Sophia's biography got cut off, so maybe this is a good place to start. But I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about your background prior to you becoming an artist, a visual artist. You trained as a dancer initially, and then you studied anthropology. And I think that there's a really interesting movement in your work between representations of physical people that are in movement, and then observations of things in stasis. And there's this increasing porosity, I think, as the work goes on, where actually this kind of idea of bodies and movement tends to get more and more fixed, and the objects that you're looking at seem to become more and more animated. And we looked at the works chronologically here. So we have the extract of The Host, which has its Scottish premiere, as Sophia mentioned, tomorrow in Glasgow, as part of the Glasgow Film Festival. We started off with You Made Me Love You, which is from 2005, and then in the middle we had Colonel Bunny in 2010, which was kind of quite a change, a formal change in your practice. But I was wondering if we could talk specifically about that kind of that relationship that you've had with the camera, how that impulse started, you know, from, I guess, your interest in being a dancer and also anthropology, but actually to taking up the camera as a way of looking and thinking. What really informed that impulse and that movement?
Well, I think I'm always trying to work out what it is that I'm doing and reaching for something else to help me do that. So in terms of the particular dance training that I had was dance is very experientially based, and the particular training that I had especially so. And I found it very difficult to think about choreography, which is something formal, while being within my own body. And I also wanted to connect dance and choreography and the ideas of performance to other kinds of experiences in the real world outside of theatrical setting. So the camera was a way of doing that. So I suppose I had the idea that it would distance me. I would have a distance, but I guess the distance is that I was able to work with people who didn't move in the way that I did, whose and I was particularly interested in groups of people and how they moved together or against each other, and that would inform me. I mean, initially I started. I worked with amateur dancers. The film that we didn't show, Human Radio, was a film where I put an advertisement in the newspaper and I asked people to contact me if they were interested in, if they liked to dance in private moments of personal abandon. That was kind of quite an early film, and I went and filmed them, and I was very struck by how clear people were about why they moved, and they had very clear philosophical and spiritual reasons, or whatever it was. They were very certain about it and very clear about it in a way that I didn't feel. So I started filming other kinds of movement and thinking about how the different kinds of logic with which people moved, and different physical systems, I suppose.
And the frame becomes like a really explicit form of your intervention. I always think about it, particularly like with these archival shots in Colonel Bunny and also in The Host, that the frame, your frame feels very contemporary. It makes works that feel archival or maybe out of time much more present or much more kind of recognizable. But also the way that the frame functions on bodies. You've always used the close-up in this, with this knowledge that the close-up produces like a kind of hyper-performance. It becomes, the gestures are huge. And you've written about this as well in this amazing text that is available outside on the table, where you talk about that actually the close-up produces very strange forms of equivalence, that you can have a building far away and then you can have the twitch of a mouth close up, and that there's some kind of parity between these two things, or the drama can be the same. And I was wondering a little bit about your kind of decision. I find this like a very photographic technique as opposed to like a filmic technique, because it's very focused on some kind of form of intimacy of that you you think a lot, or I think a lot about that kind of phrase of the idea of portraiture as kind of soul theft, you know, that kind of early idea that if you took a photograph of somebody, you were taking something from them. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how that photographic impulse moved from you taking these videos of people that often you would kind of maybe slow things down, or you would have these kind of overlays of people moving in space, to actually focusing on the cut, on actually these images being static, and actually what you produced was a different kind of narrative, which was, instead of bodies moving in front of the camera, you were moving the pictures.
I mean, I think tying into the question before about visual anthropology was a way of me thinking about the encounter, thinking about the photographic encounter, and a way of thinking about performance. But curiously, as I started to think about the photographic encounter, I mean, I think there's I mean, just physically, the way I'm working with large groups of people, and which demands a certain mode of production, which doing that repeatedly produced a certain quality of production, I felt. And I sort of, part of me just wanted to work more quietly, and I guess I've in thinking about the encounter between me and I'm just trying to think how I went from these living beings to the I mean, I think that once I started looking at photographs and working with photographs, I felt that I was using the same things. I've always worked very strongly with the frame and with the cut, as the, you know, very powerful special effects in all of the films. I mean, You Made Me Love You's one take. But as soon as I started working with still images, I think that I feel it more. I feel the frame more, and I feel the edit more. So I felt more conscious of film, of the film process somehow.
I mean, it seems like it's that thing where you have one image and you put on another image, and that is the equation that equals narrative, and then you add sound, and that is the thing that makes it cinema. And working within these kind of very minor gestures or these minor operations seems to produce this very particular effect. And I was really struck with that beginning of Colonel Bunny, where it feels so cinematic. You have the scene, the setting of the scene, and the build up, and then the move into the interior room, and the idea that there's this kind of this world being built, which of course is the operation of photography, particularly this type of photography that has it occurs out of the backdrop of, well, from within colonialism, building one's own kind of world within a pre-existing one. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the decisions that you were making about sound, where that was sourced, how that process came together for you on very kind of practical terms, and the negotiations between what fits and what doesn't fit, and how did you source that, and what felt right at a certain moment in time.
I mean, I think it's important to say that, I mean, I'm struck when I'm looking at, say, Colonel Bunny, at how coherent it feels in terms of spatially, how you travel through the space of a photograph, and through, well, space and time are the things that sound brings to a photograph, and it creates, time is created through the sound, and the space is created through the sound. But I mean, I'm sort of amazed at and it sounds banal to say, the illusion of cinema is amazing, because I have to remember, and I want to remind you, that these are all grabbed photographs from all different places, and it's at a certain point it was just a mass of chaos, and it's I remind myself of that when I'm looking at it, because I wasn't aware quite as I was doing it at how effectively they become. You can move through space and time through these very different pictures taken by different people in different places. But the photographs, as I'm working, they don't really have time, and I found it impossible to build up a sequence of I'd build up a sequence, but without sound on them, I have no sense of time, and I would just lose my sense of, have I been watching this image for a second, a minute? Do you know what I mean? So, and I'd have this thing quite often. I'd put a sequence of images in a timeline and press the space bar, and then not know whether I'd pressed it once or twice, whether it was actually. And the moment you think it's a film is the moment you feel sure that something is you're waiting for something to change. Or you've made a mistake, it's still on pause and you're just there for quite a long time thinking, how long have I been here? I'm just saying that because it's, I think those things, I gather sound from the internet as I'm working. But I think those, and to create, initially it's just to give myself a feeling of space and time, and then I start thinking it's sort of, I guess you could almost say it's quite theatrical. I'm creating events and being quite precise about the space and time.
I think it's really interesting as well that the kind of the interventions of the sound. I knew this person who he used to grade photographs, and if he started listening to music, he could only ever listen to that one track again and again and again. Otherwise, the grading would be off across his portfolio. And I'm really interested in how that anecdote really points to the idea that sound can suspend you in a moment, but it can also, its intervention kind of take you away. And I was really struck at the end of Colonel Bunny, as you see these figures, the servant figures in the recesses of the space. Sometimes they appear faceless because of the way that the shadows are cast, and that the attention of the photographer is not there at all. Points to like a kind of coming insurrection that was always there, that was always present, and is continual in the photograph. It's like really fixed. The photograph is forever in a way, and that you chose that moment to insert a sound that is not contemporary with any of the sounds prior. That fire is elemental, or a gunshot is expected in this period of time potentially, but that you choose to kind of end on the sound of a helicopter. And I was wondering if you could talk to that kind of these moments of anachronism that appear at the very end of Colonel Bunny, but also I think a lot in The Host, this kind of abutting of different times that is achieved partly through the technology, of the visual technology that you're using, but definitely through the sound and also through your own narrative.
A big part of what the sound is doing is creating distance or closeness. And I think, the way the framing works does that as well. It's you're either being invited, I think, to lose yourself within the world, within the space of an image, and almost forget that it's a photograph, and at other moments being locked out, it's just a small piece of paper that's black and white, and the sound, the shifts in sound are doing a lot of that work. In terms of, so I think the anachronism is, time is a very strong theme in The Host throughout. It's constantly shifting in time. That film and that use of time is very particular in that I keep on grounding. I want to ground the sense of history in the present, which is the present in the archive, and to draw attention to the idea of looking. And I think maybe all of the films, if I can link them all, are to do with looking, and looking as a process, and looking as a labour, and looking as something that's, you know, so subjectively grounded, and that it can produce multiple meanings from these archival photographs that were designed to categorize and to fix things. I
think it's really interesting in that early work that quite often you have the camera pointed at somebody who might look at the camera. So there's this form of direct address that is to do with being in the present, to really connect. Or looking at a camera simulates two people being together. It's kind of a simulation of like porous body contact or something, like I see you, I feel you. And of course it's only ever a representation, because I see you but you don't see me, you know, with the camera. And then as kind of time goes on, you end up with this very static encounter, which is people like literally posing for photographs. Not posing for you, but posing for some kind of future that isn't about the present. It's about trying to project one's authority or one's presence into a moment where you're kind of no longer there. But I think it's very interesting, this gradual kind of creep of time of the form of looking. It seems to be that you were looking at people initially, and then you're looking at these results of history. But in the host, and you kind of allude to it at the beginning of this clip, you begin to look at your own process, both as an artist and also the kind of the fundamental aspects of your daily life and how they do or do not interact with your forms of looking as an artist. There's this kind of slight slip between a profession, we might say, like an artistic practice, and actually the intervention of life events that cause a different type of looking, a kind of a looking at one's own mortality and one's own family, and that's a much more intimate form of looking. And I was wondering if you were aware of that, or if you're aware of that kind of shift or change in yourself, not just within the process of making the host, but actually how that form of looking has changed for you.
I think that I'm being explicit in the host about something that was implicit in the previous work, in that I'm making quite a lot of misuse of archival objects, and I'm mixing them up with things that don't belong, that belong outside of the archive, in order to draw attention to, the way I work, or the way I might think associatively between images. And I guess there are plays on double meaning in Why Colonel Bunny Was Killed. Here and there I'm playing on double meanings, or, you know, the fact of the goat's beard reminds me of the muller's beard. You know, I don't know whether whether you have the same associations that I do, but there are different places where I'm making associations between particular details, and I guess that's being played out in the host, isn't it? I'm making it quite blunt that because partly I don't know where I'm going, and I've got this mass of material and I don't know what it all means, and I've got to make meaning, so I start talking about that process of finding meaning in the host. I guess that's much more.
But there's also this kind of diaristic quality that begins to emerge. You know, I think in Colonel Bunny there's a clear sense of a timeline, that there's these letters, these from your family that you're kind of drawing on and matching them to an archive. And then actually what happens in the host is there are multiple timelines. There's the timelines of the photographs, there's there's geological time, and then there's your time. But essentially, there's also the acknowledgement that it's all your time, you know, that this is your work and this is your kind of configuration that you've put together. But I was wondering if we could kind of get back to some of the kind of the formal qualities of the work of these very formal associations that you make. In Colonel Bunny, it's between you know, like the landscape and maps and, you know, a tea towel, or it's kind of pushed to another extreme.
Headdress.
Sorry, a headdress. And in The Host, it becomes almost these kind of witty plays, like these visual puns that you get between the ziggurat and your sandwich, or the sandwich and the napkin, and just the way that forms kind of present themselves in a, not quite an unconscious, but there's a kind of psychology that maybe you're not quite in charge of, or there's a way in which meaning is working its way through you.
I mean, I guess with both of the films that's there, I mean, you know, with the looking at the details of the gestures that you were talking about before, I'm hoping that by looking closely, unconscious gestures. I mean, those are incredible stagings in Colonel Bunny, incredible how they stage, and you know, I'm thinking about the in a way, I'm trying to activate that photographic encounter between the camera person and these people being staged, and to think about what's going on in that moment. And I feel the same way in The Host, well, certainly in the later part of it.
You've kind of referred to that before, almost like as a performance, like using the photograph, like animating the photograph to have its own kind of drama or its own performance before.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if it's so much the case in Colonel Bunny, but the feeling that also that you as a viewer, your relationship to the people that who are looking back at you, and that we are also a historically situated person looking at a colonial situation and how we see ourselves as well. So it's the photographer, the encounter between the photographer and the subject, and then vicariously again through the film, I hope that by adding time to that photograph, it brings that process and makes us think about that. I mean, the whole thing of looking at details in those photographs, I mean, there's such an amazing technology, these ones from turn of the 20th century images, that whenever I would order them and they would come to me as files and I'd open them up on my screen, they'd be magnified hugely, and I would find myself lost, and I'd think, what on earth have I ordered? What is this? And I'd scroll, I'm doing the gesture, scroll across and find something on, you know, I'd be in some grass, there'd be a foot, and then I'd scroll up and find things that I hadn't seen when I was just there looking. Actually, I would get more or different things than I could remember, and it would take a few weeks as well. And then the terrible shock of scrolling and hitting the edge of the frame, which suddenly feels like it's the edge of the world.
Yeah.
So that process, that kind of chance framings, and chance framings that reveal relationships that I hadn't looked at or thought of, and that change the hierarchy of the photograph about what's important in it. So I guess that's one thing that kind of produced my ways of reconfiguring the photograph or reimagining what was important in it. Because some of it's very, very straight, very, you know, fantastically staged, remarkably staged. But there's always details as well that weren't meant to be looked at as well.
Yeah, I want to open it up to some audience questions in a second, but what you were kind of saying, it really strikes me that as having some kind of resonance with Paul Virilio, the philosopher, who writes a lot about kind of vision and acceleration and speed. And he says, the field of vision has always seemed to me comparable to the ground of an archaeological excavation. And it's this idea of, I think, and this is a very contemporary way of looking, this idea of looking at static images and searching them. Like that there is evidence, but within that you're still trying to go across it. But actually what happens is you're met with surface, and the way in which we interpret surface is either in terms of specificity or abstraction. But there is this paradox in your work that it can be both. And particularly that with the addition of sound, you enter into a kind of a drama with the photograph that is maybe not necessarily evidence in that forensic quality of an archive initially, but rendered through magnification, or that kind of vertiginous movement between micro and macro suddenly becomes cinema.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's great drama. I find it quite dramatic looking at photographs, and looking. I mean, it is like looking into other people's lives, looking into these albums, and not always in a nice way. I find it quite draining, very intense. I mean, it can be very boring, but it's always enigmatic, and so I think that my main impulse is to try and recreate that experience of searching and looking again for another person, for an audience. Yeah, I mean, I think that's my so and you know, sometimes, yeah, and finding that even within grids and things like that, getting excited about I guess the relationship between the different grids and systems. And I mean, the last film, the character in the film is drawing his own maps. Not only, so there are all these geological, maybe it's his training, he's a geologist, so when he writes to his mother, he does diagrams of the bungalow where he lives, of the village where he is, of the mountains.
It's a compulsion as well.
Yes, and then there's his wife who does maps of their dinner party seating arrangements, hundreds of them.
Yeah.
So
I was wondering if there's any question. Yeah.
I was just wondering about the work tattoo that you're showing here and how that fits in. I almost feel like a bridge between the first video of all the people moving, and then the archive photography, which is, I guess, archive video, and how that sort of fits into the chronology of the works that we're showing tonight.
Well, I guess there is a relationship because of me, but it was quite a long time before, although I guess maybe there is, I mean, I'm reminded of that. I think about the gestures, and there are all these army photographs that I was looking at, and those formations, the way people arrange themselves for the camera, and those drills are in tattoo are very particular arrangements. So that's me retrospectively. I can't, I guess it's hard for me to say. I think it would need to be somebody else to comment on the connection between them. I mean, I've moved from one thing to another, so yeah.
The photographs remind me of a fossil records, as it were. Have you tried to fill in the gaps in and photo record, and the music kind of guides you in a certain way, although you might rebel against that in a way. So were you influenced by evolution at all? By evolutionary process where there's a photo record and there's gaps in the photo records and you're trying to fill in the gaps.
I'm so embarrassed, I can't understand your accent.
Oh, sorry. So we're talking a little bit. If I understand you correctly, you're talking about the idea of like looking at evolution and
that's right.
the gaps.
Photos, the photographs represent photos, and they're almost like gaps.
So the gaps, almost like the fossil record. That the fossil record, the gaps in the fossil record somehow mirror like the gaps in an archive, or the kind of abyss of meaning.
Well, I mean, I think about the gaps because you know, the last film is taken from the BP archive, or the archive of what was called the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, who also have a huge film library, which is very interesting. But when I looked at the films, I thought these are really amazing documents. I mean, really, from 1920s right through, they hired most amazing, amazing filmmakers to make all these essentially propaganda films, educational films for them. But I didn't want to use them because I couldn't see myself intervening in them, because they were like whole documents with whole narratives that were worth considering in their entirety. Whereas the photo, I just picking up on the idea of gaps, they kind of invite it, the fragmentary nature of the photographs just invite, and the gaps between them invite me to, or invite anyone really to try and put them together.
That's right, kind of contested sense.
Yeah.
But there's also that kind of very interesting thing about the way blackness is used in the host. You know, it's the parts that the scanner doesn't pick up. It seems to isolate objects, and almost they become kind of talismanic or fetish-like, and you really kind of attempt to undo that occasionally by, you know, showing, you know, your keyboard or something. But there is this kind of play on the idea of forensic evidence and how it does or does not fit with your kind of one's life, you know.
And it's ideal. I mean, of course, that film's a lot about geology and drilling and excavation and exploitation and archaeology, and so all of those analogies work very well for that film. But it's true that what did you just say?
Oh, about the black, the use of this kind of the way in which objects are kind of isolated in space.
I just showed it to some students, and they said it's like a radio play, and I thought, well, I guess it is. I don't know what to say about that, except that sometimes, I mean, a lot of it is about creating enough space. It's so speculative. It has a speculative. I'm speculating about the past, and I don't really know what it is. But I'm just suggesting a few things, and sometimes, and the less you show, the more space there is for everyone to, I hope, participate in these leaps through time, and to think about what things might mean, and that search for meaning.
I think on that note, I actually got a very specific comment on that reflection while I was watching your films. And I found those gaps or spaces actually behind the narrative lies behind what you actually brought to the surface of film, actually more powerful and interesting. And I found your film got this extremely amazing this capacity and the sensibility of giving the power to the viewer to construct the narrative of their own. And even, sometimes in between the frames and there's no sound at all. just therefore plays a few seconds. And a few seconds on the screen actually is quite long for a viewer. But then these curiosities being aroused. And then automatically as a viewer myself, I would start constructing the narratives. I found that's quite interesting. It's almost like not reading a novel, but reading a poem. You have your own.
Yeah, I mean, on one level, I'm being very controlling with the emphasis on the framing, and on the other, trying to create some space for the imagination.
It's almost like how montage would work. Sorry? It's almost like how montage would work in lots of photographs. You see collages, montage, how that would work as well. You actually, from the fragments of images you create, bring out.
I mean, one of the place of the black spaces in this, partly, I had to find a way to, I really wanted to make myself present in this film because I am present in it, and I thought, and I'm present in history, and I wanted that idea. I mean, well, with both of them, really, I wanted to find ways to bring the past and the present into relationship. And in this one, I want to put myself in it because I'm already there. I'm already in this story. I'm part of this colonial story, and I want to. How can I make that physical or visible, and make it lively? So then I was literally trying to find ways of what else can I put into the scanner, which was my main tool, and how can I. And I hate my own voice. I mean, it wasn't, I don't particularly relish it, but I also knew that for this story, in order to tell this story, having looked through masses and masses of photographs, I have to be in it to tell, in order to be able to tell it. But I'm kind of have to use an archival logic in order to put myself and my presence and me looking in it. So I guess that's quite, and so I suppose I'm using an archival logic or a fragmentary logic where I just have to, I looked for things that were close to me that could, which were the evidence of me in the archive. I mean, and also there's so much that I don't find and that I don't know, I guess.
It's the paradox of containment.
Yeah.
The host.
I was thinking of asking about this autobiography, but at the start of Criminal Money, it seems like a family album. And it's very hard to identify the moment at which you realise that it can't possibly be a family album, it has to be something bigger. And I'm just kind of wondering where that was, because I was starting to identify people who look like you within it, for example. I think, well, yes, no, and you flip back and forward off that identification. But how important is it for you that becomes a bit of an instability?
I think it's a mistake, really. It's my mistake because I don't think you need to know that it's a relative unless you've read that you're coming to my screening tonight. Unlike the next film where, and this is a relative that's so distant that I don't feel, I know it is a relative of mine, but it's very different than the immediacy, the emotional immediacy of one's parental family in the second film. So that's why I said I'm sort of surprised. I was surprised by the time I finished it that it looked coherent. That's a mistake because I had to go all over the place to get these things and nothing fitted together when I was in the middle of making it. It's only by the time you've stuck things together. I mean, I made one of my performance films was to do with a lot of stage fighting. I got lots of stage fighters to fight each other. And when they were doing it, it all, it doesn't look very good. And then by the time I mean, it's so obvious, it's banal to say, but I showed it, and I had friends who had to leave the room. I was really shocked, and I didn't really recognise that that's what happened. So, I mean, the last film, The Host, the quality of the images changes a lot. They're much ropier. A lot of the pictures are not the geological ones. There are some amazing geological ones that are amazing high resolution. But I'm working with I end up working with quite a lot of quite ropey runs, and it's much more. You're much more aware of the construction, and I've made that much more explicit. Whereas Colonel Bundy, I just stay within the frame of the photographs. The second one, I'm using them much more as objects, and what's underneath them and what's behind them and what album are they in becomes part of it. I do that much less, and yeah.
Well, unless there's any more questions, but thank you very much for coming, and thanks of course to Miranda for speaking tonight.